Okay, so yeah, so Gigabyte has dropped their manuals for their upcoming motherboards, and you know, the motherboard manual is like one of the most detailed things that you can do, that you can reveal for your product, really, because it's basically the book that has every single fine print for the features on your motherboard. So, as far as I can tell, ASUS, if we look, let's say, ASUS X670, I don't think they actually have any, like if we look at, sure, X670 Xtreme, if I go into there, that's not the product page. Let's look for the product page. Yeah, so if we go, there's no support, right? Because usually these are under support, and under tech specs, there's nothing really. This is not, yeah, it gives you a lot of information, but it's not what I'm looking for. It's not the fine print. So here is, yeah, here is the Z590 Aorus Pro AX. So this is not a crazy expensive motherboard. It's, I think, like 350 CAD or something like that originally, and now I think it's like going more like 250-ish these days. Okay, so it's still over 300. Canadian pricing, of course. So this is pretty much, I would say, at least for 2021, this was a very forward-looking motherboard. And I guess the main feature that I would say is forward-looking is quad M.2 slots. And so this, yeah, so if you look at these two, this lane here is 16 electrically, but if you plug something into one of these, it splits it into by 8 and then 2x4s. You can force that bifurcation and other things. And so yeah, you have 6. Some things I want you to pay attention is that this motherboard, I own this motherboard, and I can tell you, attest that this is true. This one's only up to 80, but it also supports 60 and 42. The South Bridge connected one, that's why it's called SB, because it's going through the chipset here. This can do everything, 110, 80, 60, 42. Can't do the super small one, I think, like the one that you have on the Steam Deck. That's 20, I think. Can't do that here. And these ones can do 110, 80, 60, okay? And 60 is kind of important, and they all have 60, and they all have 80. 80 is pretty standard. That's what most are. Some of the really long ones, like the enterprise one's going to be 110, but 60 is important because if you have, let's say, U.2 enterprise drives, your U.2 adapters, the ones I own are 60 mils. They're not 80. So, and it's kind of like it's unnecessary to have them so large. Okay, because when we start looking at, I don't think we have pricing yet, unless you're some sort of insider or YouTuber or some tech journalist, but I don't have any pricing. So I tried to sort these, what I think is the most, what's going to be the most expensive / feature rich to the least, right? So in the order here we have the Aorus Xtreme, the Master, and then the this one, the Elite AX. I think this one's the closest to the Pro AX. The Pro AX would be lower than this, I believe, in the product stack. This is actually not an X670E. This is a regular X670 board. These ones are all E's. So we can actually take a look here. And immediately, yeah, so immediately, let's look at what we have here with the X670E. So this one here, it has the 4M.2 slots, which I said should be standard. If we look at power, just so you know, power consumption is definitely going up even when compared to Rocket Lake, because this is an LGA 1200 board. This is a like a dual 4-pin EPS here for those quote-unquote like 8-pin, and then this is an additional 4-pin EPS, and this is, you can just see dual 8-pins here. Yeah. So yeah, and yeah, you can see the dual chipset solution. That's every X670 is this dual chipset. You can see, oh yeah, the SATA ports, they look fine, right? So we have 6 SATA 3 ports, 6 SATA 3 ports. Yeah, we'll get to the fine print on that one in a second. Everything else here is kind of makes sense, I'd say, with the Aorus Xtreme. I mean, if you're coming from Rocket Lake, right? If you said that this is your standard baseline, which is what I said, this doesn't really seem too exciting. I think these are Gen 5s. I don't know. I think these two are splitting off of this one. They definitely have that same mechanism that we saw with the Z590 Aorus Pro AX. Excuse me, Z590 Aorus Pro AX. These are tongue twisters. So the other thing with the Xtreme here that we can see off the top of my head is the networking here. It's a 10 gigabit Ethernet, and it's the same classic Marvell action from Aquantia. I think they purchased out years ago. So this is like, they haven't really changed this. And here's the block diagram for the Aorus Xtreme. And we can see here, so first of all, fine print, DDR5. So I think we need to scroll down to like one of these tables. This motherboard, you're probably paying a crap ton of money for this motherboard, and the fine print here is Gigabyte's only advertising the traces in this motherboard for $5,200. Now, obviously, if you look back at the picture here, this is a quad setup here, quad DIMM. You can only do up to 32 gigs per DIMM. So that's not really an improvement over AM4, because a lot of the newer AM4 boards is the same thing, but instead of DDR4 we have DDR5. But the 5200 is probably when you have this all filled out, you can only do 5200, which is not that high, because if we consider 4800 to be like the minimum for JEDEC spec, yeah, 5200 is not a huge improvement. And it's definitely not an enthusiast speed that an enthusiast would want to run on an enthusiast motherboard, right? So maybe if you have only two of these, you could do more than 5200. But yeah, warning, only rated for 5200. That's like only one bump up from like bare minimum for DDR5, and this is like primitive territory, right? Like not ready territory. Oh, yeah, so this is what I was talking about, the SATA ports. I wanted to show you the fine print here. Yeah, so the chipset, the AMD chipset, that X670 chipset, or it's not X670, but whatever this generation of Promontory chipsets is called, I forgot the exact name. It only supplies 4 SATA 3 ports, so they're actually stealing from a second one. They're stealing 2 extra SATA 3 ports, which is 4 and 5, because it started at 0, right? And this is also really weird. I don't think I've seen this before. PCI Express by 2. Have we really seen 2 lanes before? So the nice thing is these are all physically 16. This is electrically by 4. No big surprise. But I'm not sure if I've seen by 2 before. I've seen by 1. I've seen by 4, by 8, and by 16. But 2, I'm not sure if I heard that. So that may be an interesting reaction if this is kind of a newer thing. Or maybe there might be cards that are not capable of accepting 2 instead of 1 or 4, so I'm not sure. This is kind of weird. I've never really seen this before. Maybe it's in spec, but I'm not aware of any I'm sure probably somewhere there might be some, but I've never really seen this myself. Yeah, so let's take a look here. Let's go down the stack. This is the Aorus Master. I'm assuming it's inferior to the Xtreme, because I assume Xtreme is more extreme than Master. Yeah, don't ask me about marketing, because it doesn't really make sense, right? That's my take on marketing. So yeah, we can definitely see that I think this is inferior because we don't have 10 gig, and I'm not really sure what this U3 2G2 LAN is. Oh, before we move on here, we should actually take a look at the spec table here. Oh yeah, it looks like there's a dedicated SPI for BIOS and TPM. And yeah, we should look down here, because I think I saw details on some other things that you might be interested in. Yeah, so there's the LAN. So you only have this one NIC. This is gone are the days where you have 2 NICs, because one's the high-end one and then you just get a regular gigabit. That's gone now. Yeah, so the onboard graphics here, this is true 4K 60 Hz through HDMI 2.0, and then this is 4K at 144, which is not too shabby from DisplayPort. It supports HDR as well. Now, of course, this is what Gigabyte says the port on the motherboard is capable of, like electric, like from the what it's certified for, basically. The actual, obviously, there's no actual graphics on the motherboard. You have to use the iGPU. But yeah, this is what they're saying the ports are rated for from Gigabyte's end. Also, yes, you're talking about memory. I'm not sure if this was announced yet, but memory here is non-ECC unbuffered, so you cannot use ECC memory at all. I don't know if that's AM5 wide or if that's just specific to this or other Gigabyte motherboards, but we'll see. Yeah, 32 gig maximum DIMM capacity times 4, which is 128. That's not an improvement over the AM4 DDR4 motherboards. They were also 32 gig DIMMs up to 128. And yeah, as I said, not impressed with the speeds here. They call the chipset X670, even though this is an X670E, which means that the E is really just marketing. Audio, which I kind of don't care about, even though I do use onboard audio. And yeah, Wi-Fi's AX210, so that's 6 gigahertz, Bluetooth 5.3, and obviously I expect 160. That's standard for the AX210. And here's the fine print with the slots. The PCIe Express slot, that top PCIe by 16 is a 5.0 slot, runs at 16 unless you put M.2 B or C, and then it's put in by 8. So B and C, let's go back up here, B and C, I did highlight them correctly. It's these two. So primarily, if you go from top to bottom, these two are directly connected to the CPU. You're not cutting anything, and then once you start populating these, then you start cutting. Oh, here's the BIOS chip. It's located right here, by the way, if you ever need to like desolder it for some reason. And the chip is not too shabby. They didn't cheap out this time. Oh yeah, there's the USB ports here, so you get like 3 ports dangling directly from the CPU, and they're 3.2, but they're 3.2 Gen 2 at best. There's no USB 4 on this motherboard as far as I can tell. You get a bunch of ports from the chipset. You do get quite a bit of ports, 2 USB-C ports and 4 USB 2.0 ports, but that's coming from a hub, so it's actually like 1 USB 2, and then the hubs makes 4. Yeah. This stuff, yeah, it looks like you have a dedicated TPM here, maybe. The one thing I wanted to highlight from this one is the BIOS chip, because we got screwed over last time with AM4 at the very beginning with like the 16 megabit flash chips. This is 256 megabits, so hopefully that should be enough for this generation. And yeah, it supports Windows 11. Yeah, okay. And so if we look at this Aorus Xtreme, this is a little bit more budget. I mean, the DDR5 memory thing looks the same. This looks the same. Like if we actually compare the topology, they're very, very similar. The diagram is like almost identical. What's different here? Am I comparing the right thing? Okay, so the location of the LAN chip is here. You got a 2.5 gig LAN chip, so that's what I was talking about. I didn't know what this is. And the BIOS chip is in the same location. I mean, nothing really different here. Maybe some of these have been moved around a little bit. SATA ports, again, you have 6 SATA ports, but if we look at the topology, that's just pulling 2 extra from this chipset here, right here, from a switch on the PCI Express 3.0 bus. So are they using like a 2-port SATA controller versus this one? Yeah, this one here says that they're pulling it directly from the chipset, while this one here says they're using a switch that's connected to the PCI Express 3 bus, which will switch off your by 2 port. So this one actually has more I/O dangling off of this secondary chipset, which you have to remember, I don't know if I talked about the congestion, right? If you fully load this one and then do some load on this one, this is going to be really congested, because it's not 2x4 links to the CPU, it's 1x4 link, and then the chipsets are daisy chained. So this slot here gets disabled when you start plugging in things over here. So I would expect from this could just be inaccuracy, but this sounds like they have a separate SATA controller instead of pulling it from the chipset, and I don't see, again, USB 4 is not here. I know Asus is doing a lot of them. If we look at the table, maybe we'll see more, because I didn't prep so much for this one. So again, 5200 is what they're rating the traces for, at least one running in by 4. Dual channel, non-ECC unbuffered, again. Supports they all do support both Expo and XMP, so you're not going to get screwed if you buy a DDR5 that only has XMP support. I will say, if you buy memory that only has Expo support, you will be screwed if you bought like a Z690 for that came out with Alder Lake. Yeah, you won't have support for Expo, that's for sure. Yeah, so it looks like display port. Yeah, HDMI. Yeah, it looks like in this one, one of the USB-C ports can do display port. I don't think that was the case in the other one. And again, same thing for the HDMI 2.0 when we look at what this ports can do. Yeah, 2.5 gig LAN. This is probably the 225V, I think it's called, and then the X210 wireless solution. Okay, expansion slots. They don't really say that the top will get split here. A, B, and 2 connected to the south bridge. Okay, so that's the difference. So the difference here is that you will maintain this by 16 here. Yeah, you can even see here, south bridge. These two instead are connected to the south bridge. So let's take a look at this block diagram here. Okay, yeah, so I didn't really pay enough attention here. So one of those M.2s, this is C, is connected to the top chipset, and then D gets the short end of the stick and goes to the last chipset in the daisy chain. So this one is going to this chipset, this one's going to that chipset. I'm sure that does cut down on cost. And you might say, well, isn't it better that I get the full 16 here? Well, as I said, there's going to be a congestion issue with that by 4, because if you have a RAID or something, you basically have like 4.0 PCIe 4.0 by 4 bandwidth. Okay, so that you could saturate that kind of easily. I don't know if these are 3.0 speeds. No, this is 4.0 speeds. They're both 4.0 speeds. Yeah, so you're using effectively 8 lanes here, but you only have a 4-lane link. So you're definitely going to cause a bottleneck here. Yeah. So this is like you don't get the slash top slot, but you're going to get a bottleneck with your storage. And your GPU really doesn't need 4.0 by 16, and it definitely doesn't need 5.0 by 16 if they ever do support 5.0, at least in the next, I don't know, 5 years. So it is more worth it, especially if you have a 5.0 GPU with like RDNA 3, if that's 5.0. It's more worth it to slash that to a by 8 and then take the other 4 lanes and pass it on to M.2 instead of connecting it to the south bridge. If you have one connected to the south bridge, it's fine, but when you have 2 connected to the south bridge like this, yeah, you're definitely guaranteeing yourself a bottleneck. So yeah, that's where the cost cutting is coming from, because obviously the Switch is expensive. It's not free. It's not radically expensive, but it's not free, right? So the money savings is from the lack of this. I mean, maybe it's okay, but yeah, that's a bottleneck you need to consider. Going back here, yeah, so that's why we didn't see anything here about the splitting, is because, you know, obviously it's coming from the chipset. And one's coming from the top, one's coming from the bottom. You have 6 SATA ports. Yeah, and we already discussed that it looks a little weird on this motherboard because it's a switch here that switches off a by 2 link or 2 lanes, which means I think it's kind of like, it looks like one SATA port takes 1 lane, which I don't know. 600 megabytes per second. That's kind of seems a little bit too excessive. Again, these are only 110 millimeter or 80 millimeter. No 60 and no 42 and no 20 on this motherboard. Otherwise, nothing really too surprising. This is a 256 megabit flash. Excuse me. I think this was 512. We said. Is this one 512 or am I dreaming? No, this is 256 as well. Okay, you don't get a step down there. And this is the last one. This is the one I can't remember, the Aorus Elite AX. Okay, now I'm starting to remember. This one's non-extreme. And you can already tell what's going on here with the non-extreme. And you can see here, look at the SATA ports. Look at those SATA ports. It is only 4 ports. And so we can, when we look at the block diagram, we're going to see that. We're probably just pulling it from the top chipset here. Looks like we have the same thing as the Aorus Master, where we have, instead of cutting this to a by 8, these two are just dangling off of the south bridges and probably will bottleneck to hell. BIOS chips over here. This is now Realtek 2.5 gig. So this was Intel and this was a 10 gig Marvell. This is now a Realtek, so we're definitely getting a downgrade unless you actually think this is good, because the Intel 225V is buggy and this one, the Realtek one, who knows how buggy that is. Yeah, so again, you still have these dual 8-pin EPS connectors, and you still have like a reset switch here, power switch dedicated on the motherboard. Did we have those over here? Those are nice. Yeah, you have a more fancy one over here, and your reset switch is down there. Okay, I mean, you don't need to have these big fancy buttons. I know, yeah, you don't need to have this fancy button. These type of buttons work fine. The reset thing over here is going to be interesting for wiring your case. That is a bit peculiar. Clear Cmos is down here. Clear Cmos switch. You have a clear Cmos switch for all of these? I don't see a clear Cmos switch on this one. Or that one. Maybe it's on the back, rear buttons. Yeah, but this one you have the clear Cmos over here, which is nice. So you don't need to have that screwdriver. I have a weird bit on my screwdriver that has like 2 prongs sticking out. It's very perfect for this. Triggering these. Yeah, these are good enough. The reset pins here, if you actually want to use reset, interesting location. That's my opinion. Okay, let's take a look at the block diagram. So this, again, these don't look really too surprising. Again, they have by 2 electrical. This feels really strange. Maybe it's just I haven't paid enough attention to motherboards in the past. This one doesn't have a by 2, right? Electrically by 2. These are by 4s. Yeah, interesting. This must be a new thing. Let's take a look at the block diagram. So we definitely have an M.2 slot over here. This is C on the south bridge. D on the south bridge is again on this one. So again, the daisy chaining and the bottlenecking concern is there. Yeah, 4 SATA ports. That's pulling from the top one. Oh yeah, if you have SATA drives and you have M.2s, yeah, that's also being shared, right? If you need to talk to the CPU. Yeah, and you have B and A. So there you go. So really you have only one 5.0. So hold on here. We didn't really talk about 5.0 versus 4.0 because this was just all 5.0, right? All 5.0, because that's what AMD was saying when it was Xtreme. If it's Xtreme, you know it's 5.0 everywhere. Yeah, this one's not 5.0 everywhere. You can see this is mostly 4.0. Okay. And so that's the 16 slot. That's going to be 4.0. One of your M.2. You only have one your M.2 slot. This one here. This is the only 5.0 on this motherboard. Okay, everything else here is 4.0 or worse. And yeah, it's very close to the CPU, so I guess that helps with the cost. The closest into the CPU, the one M.2 slot is 5.0. Everything else is 4.0 or slower, right? Very few 3.0. You gotta buy 2 for the 3.0. Your RG45 Realtek is 3.0 and M.2 Wi-Fi is 3.0. Yeah, but those things don't really need too much speed. Okay, again, DDR5 here, 5200 megahertz best. Okay, so SPI bus with the BIOS and TPM. USB 2 hub. Again, you get less USB, I guess. And the USB is, again, not too exciting. More Gen 1s than Gen 2s this time around, I think. And no USB 4. That's just not something I've seen on these Gigabyte boards at all. Yeah, so standard X670 here, 5200, 4 slots still, 32. Yeah, same story. No ECC. So you're gonna only an HDMI port here. So no 144 hertz at 4K. This is 4K, but you know UHD. UHD, that's the ones over here, right? UHD. This is UHD. You could do 144 hertz at UHD on these ones. Nope, not this time around. You only get a single HDMI port, and that HDMI port is definitely inferior. This is interesting. So they actually cut the budget here, really, because instead of getting an AX210, you get this MediaTek. you get this MediaTek solution, which is AMD rebrands it as an RZ616. They do say it's 160 megahertz, so that's good, but yeah. I guess that was my main complaint with the previous MediaTek solutions, is that the Wi-Fi 6 MediaTek solutions were only 80 megahertz, but this one says 160 megahertz. But yeah, Bluetooth is only 5.2, but I don't think that's really going to matter, let's be honest here. Your expansion slots here, one PCI Express 5.0, 4.0, yeah, we already kind of covered that. You have Crossfire support. Not that that's useful. SLI is gone for a while now because NVIDIA doesn't license that anymore. But yeah, so you can see here one of these is a 5.0 coming from the CPU. That's A. B is a 4.0 from the CPU. You don't have to worry about disconnecting anything. And then the chipset provides the South bridges at 4.0 speeds and SATA 4 SATA 6 gate connectors. Yeah, so that's basically all the AMD motherboards. This is also 256 megabit flash. Okay, so that's basically all of the motherboards that not really leaked, but that's what we got from the specifications here. So overall, if you're looking for maximum flash storage, you're gonna have to go with the Aorus Xtreme, right? Because this is the only one that's not gonna have the chipset bottlenecking issue. Because yeah, you're gonna cut your top slot to by 8, but that's something you're gonna have to live with if you want maximum storage performance. If you don't want maximum storage performance, really both of these will do pretty good, to be honest. This one's probably gonna be considerably cheaper than these two, so this is probably gonna be fine. The Aorus Elite AX is probably gonna be fine for most people. The only thing that's kind of a bummer is the SATA ports, but at this point you could just put in some kind of HBA. Yeah, just put some HBA into one of these lower end slots anyways. Not sure that by 2 is going to be enough for 3.0, but maybe. And you should be able to survive if you want to build a NAS. But again, these Southbridge ones, yeah, you might want to be concerned if you're putting 3.0. Yeah, 2 3.0s I think is, you're okay. Yeah, you can get away with 2 3.0s. I wouldn't recommend putting anything more than 3.0s in one of these, but those dual 3.0s would still be competing with the traffic from these SATA ports over here. So I mean, it shouldn't be too bad, especially if you have hard disks populating the SATA slots. Shouldn't be too bad. But yeah, you're definitely going to have congestion. And everything I said here about these South bridges and these SATA ports is true over here. And this is going to be worse because you're going to have 2 extra SATA ports to compete with bandwidth-wise. Especially this one here, because the one that's connected to the bottom chipset is going to compete with those last 2 ports, right? And those last 2 ports disables this one for your HBA, which I don't think that was the case over here. Yeah, there's no OR. There's no OR over here for the SATA ports. Oh, yeah, but duh, there's only 4 SATA ports in this motherboard. Yeah, okay. So, yeah. You don't need to worry about switching off that PCIe by 2 because you don't have the 2 SATA ports that would switch it off. Yeah. So, yeah, that's just a look at some of the higher end boards from Gigabyte. They're pretty okay. I don't think they're anything revolutionary because they're all 4 slotters for M.2. And yeah, the one thing I will say I'm disappointed with is that it does really look like we're going to start to see the end of SATA because only 4 ports per chip. Yeah, that's the beginning of the end for SATA. I mean, it's a slow, painful death, but yeah, SATA is going to be gone probably in the next 10 years at this point. And that's just like the early signs of it, really.